Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. So my job for today is to rebuild the gear lever shift turret components. This is a job which I've never done before on this car, so I have no idea what condition these components are going to be in. Most likely this job has never been done in the life of the car. So how can you tell that this job might need doing? Well, in my case, I've noticed for a while that it's quite difficult to get the car into gear sometimes. The gear shift doesn't feel nice and smooth, it feels pretty notchy, especially when the car is cold. Part of that could be just the fact that the gearbox is getting on a little bit now, so it's not going to be quite as smooth as when it was new. But I think a lot of the problem is down to the fact that the shifter is not getting the gears into the right position properly. So I'm going to try and do this job, hopefully that will make a difference. So let's get started. Okay, so if you're planning to do this job, there are a few bits and pieces you're going to want. This is a little plastic bush which goes on the bottom of the shifter. This gets worn out over time, so you're going to want to change that out. This is a boot which goes on the top of the shift turret, and that's what stops dirt and other detritus getting into the turret oil. And then this is not strictly necessary, but in my car this is completely broken, so I'm going to change it out. This is the upper boot which goes over the top of the transmission just under where the gear lever sits, and it's there to stop noise and heat from coming up from the transmission and into the cabin. A good sign that this might be broken in your car is if you have a lot of random heat getting into the cabin and you're not quite sure where it's coming from. This is most likely the culprit. And then lastly, you're going to need a little bit of gear oil to put into the turret when you take the old oil out. You don't need very much. This is just some leftover oil I had from changing out the transmission oil. You can use pretty much any old oil really, but gear oil makes the most sense really because it is a gearbox component. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is remove this center console. So let's remove the gear lever and then these screws. And then under here are two little cables which you'll just want to remove. Okay. That allows you to get the glove box nicely out of the way. So you can see in my case that this is completely knackered. This definitely needs replacing. There's quite a lot of tearing all the way around here. Okay, so next we want to remove these bolts. Until I live near a fire station. Right, so now this is loose and we have to basically pry this bit off the top of the shift gaiter, which can be a bit tricky. I'm just going to get some pliers. Come on, you bastard. Right, I managed to get the damn thing off in the end. I actually had to cut it because it just wasn't budging. I think this rubber has just got so old that it kind of stuck itself to the shifter there. Anywho, got it off, and we don't have to worry about messing this up because we're going to be replacing this anyway. This comes as part of the new boot. So as you can see, this lower boot is also pretty far gone. Yeah, this is not doing any favors at all to this shift turret. I would imagine by now quite a lot of dirt has got in here, so that's going to mean that the bush is going to be bushed. So good thing I've got replacements for all of these things. Okay, so now we have to remove this lower boot. We've got some more 10mm screws here. Oh god, that's so loose. Jeez, could have basically undone those by hand. Very worrying. Confusingly, although these are 10mm bolts, they have the number 9 written on them for some bizarre reason. Right, so with a bit of luck we should now be able to pull this whole shift lever out. It's always a good idea to have some paper towel handy and some cloths, because apparently the oil can drip out of this quite easily and get everywhere. There we go. Okay. Well, that wasn't nearly as bad as I thought it was going to be. Right, so now we can see down into the turret there, and you can see there's not much oil in there at all. Most of it has disappeared. Anywho, we're going to now get the remainder of that oil out, and we're going to put the new bush onto the bottom of this. Right, so here we have our shift lever, and we have to replace this, and we also have to get all of this mess off here and replace it with this new one, which is slightly different design, which is interesting, but I don't think it's really going to make that much of a difference. It's the same mounting points and the same gasket on the bottom. Right, well, predictably the battery went flat halfway through that, but I have now managed to get this old boot off with a bit of cutting. For now, what we need to do is just clean this nylon thing up, because we're going to be reusing this. There's actually two parts to this. There's a nylon bush and a wave washer. Right, I'm just going to use a bit of WD-40 to clean these bits up. Some of the muck off. 30 years of muck and dirt that's been building up on these. Alright, there we go. That's a bit better. Now, one thing that's a bit concerning is that this washer has a split in it. I don't think that's supposed to be like that. I think that's just broken. But I don't have another one, so it's just going to have to go back in like that, and I'll just have to hope for the best. Right, let's just clean this up as well while we're here. Right, that looks quite a lot better. It's a bit scored. Like you can see here, there's a bit of a groove that's been damaged into this thing. It's probably because this bottom boot has been broken for so long that it's just allowed all sorts of dirt and shit in here. So that's not in very good condition, to be honest, but I think it'll be okay. It's not like it has to work at very high speeds or anything like that. So yeah, that's probably why this shift doesn't feel quite as silky smooth as it should do. Or part of the reason anyway. Okay, so the next job is to pop off this little bush. It's actually quite a lot easier if you have a vise. And what you can do is just hold it in the vise and then just tap it off with a screwdriver. Fortunately, I don't have a vise, so I just used a pair of pliers and I gave it a good old tug, and eventually it just popped off. It is rather ruined, but it doesn't matter because you're going to be replacing it with a shiny new one. Right, now we should just be able to pop this new one on with a bit of a push. There we go. Right, so when you're refitting this, you have to make sure you do it the right way around. This wave washer thing goes at the top. You can see that there's a top and a bottom to this. It can only go on one side. And that's got to go up this way with the washer at the top and the bush at the bottom. And now the last thing to do is to refit this, which has got to slide over here, and then you just got to pull it down. This is going to be quite tight, so I think what I'm going to try and do is just lubricate this with some WD-40. Should hopefully make it easier to slide this boot down over the top. There we go. Lovely. Right, so we have our rebuilt shifter here, all looking very nice, and we can now refit that to the turret. But before we do, we have to clear out all of this old nasty oil from out of here and replace it with some nice fresh new gear oil. Right, so what I'm going to attempt to do here is use this pump that I got for replacing the gearbox oil, and basically get the nozzle down into the end here and then suck up this old oil from out of here. In fact, what they recommend is if you have a turkey baster, this is supposed to be the best thing to use, but I don't have a turkey baster, so I'm making do with what I've got. Right, so in my case, I discovered that the best thing for me to actually do was to just pop this shift lever back in and put the car into gear, and that allowed me enough space to get this pump down into the side there, and as you can see there's a lot better space now for me to get this in there and pump out the rest of this oil. Right, so I think we've got the majority of the oil out there. There is still a little bit left, but not a huge amount. Nothing that's really going to be any kind of bother. Okay, so now we're going to just refill this with fresh gear oil. Basically, you don't want to fill it all the way to the top, but just get it as full as possible. It doesn't take very much, but you want to leave a little bit of a gap just so that when you put the shifter back in, it doesn't overflow. So I think that will pretty much do it, I think. Look at that nice new shiny oil. So much better. Right, so now what we can do is refit the shifter. In fact, I think I might even put a touch more. There we go, that's nice and full. So now it's just a case of retightening these bolts again, just enough to keep everything sealed. And now we can refit the boot. There we go, look at that, like a glove. And so now we can just tighten up the rest of these bolts. Okay, now we just need to refit the trim and then job done. Right, I think that's pretty much it. So I'm just going to go and just take the car for a drive quickly and see how it feels, and then I shall come back and report on my findings. Okay, so took the car out for a drive, everything seems good. I would say it's a little better. I wouldn't say it's completely solved the slight grittiness in second gear. That I think is just one synchro mesh in the gearbox. But it does feel a little bit more tight in the gear changes, so definitely an improvement and worth doing for sure. So yeah, job done. See you next time.